Tonight we have questions. Though inextricably linked, they might as well be one question. The first is this: who is really behind Jaish Al-Fatah? You may not yet have heard of them. And indeed, you kind of don't need to. Because when I tell you that Jaish Al-Fatah is a repackaged and renamed Al-Nusra Front, you'll know I'm talking about Al-Qaeda. You could call it putting lipstick on the beast that is Al-Qaeda in Syria. The lipstick won't make it look any prettier, won't change its character. It'll still be a beast. But Al-Fatah is funded by the same old, same old. If I tell you that the funds and the weapons are coming from the Persian Gulf Arab countries that have sown such murder and mayhem over the last 4 years, nearly 5 years in Syria, you'll get the picture. But the big question is, are these satrapies of the United States of America doing this despite the disapproval of the United States and its Western allies, or is it all a game? I ask because you heard it here first from me. I say it's a game. And that is an idea whose time has come. The Guardian newspaper this week, fully 1 week after I said so here on this show, raised the question of whether or not the Western allies who are supposedly fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, and for that matter in Iraq, are really actually fighting on their side. Seamus Milne, probably the finest journalist operating in Britain today, laid out bare, based on this 2012 United States intelligence report, marked secret, but secret no more. I was in receipt of this very same document just a little bit earlier. And it was what I found there that concretized, solidified a suspicion that I had been nursing for years. And the objective as well as subjective facts, when all laid out in a row, as they partly are in this 3-year-old intelligence document, leave little room for doubt. Plus I have another question, which Seamus Milne didn't pose, perhaps doesn't yet see the significance of, and I'll come to that in a minute. But let me give you the highlights, the lowlights of the United States intelligence document, August the 12th of 2012. And it's destined for all the usual suspects: Homeland Security, Department of State, CIA, United States military, the Joint Staffs, and so on and so on. It's a Department of Defense document, and it says this on the very first material page. Internally, events are taking a clear sectarian direction, 2012. And if I flip over to these quotes, you'll find them useful. If the situation unravels, there is the possibility of establishing, not that there might be established, there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria to isolate the Syrian regime. The author goes on. The ideal atmosphere for Al-Qaeda in Iraq to return to its old pockets in Mosul and Ramadi, 2012, remember, years before Mosul and now Ramadi were captured, and will provide a renewed momentum under the presumption of unifying the jihad among Sunni Iraq and Syria. And it goes on. ISIL, they call it ISI, we call it ISIL, could also declare an Islamic State through its union with other organizations in Iraq and Syria. The renewing facilitation of terrorist elements from all over the world re-entering the Iraqi arena. Well, that's pretty clear. It's pretty clear that all the people on the receiving end of this intelligence report in August of 2012 were at least, at best, warned of exactly what has taken place and did nothing to stop it. At worst, and that's my reading of the document, they are deeply complicit in all those events that are foretold 3 years ago, almost exactly 3 years ago, and have come to pass. I'm laboring that point because it segues neatly into the second question. Why didn't the US stop ISIL taking over Ramadi? Well, in a way, I've just given you the answer. If my thesis is correct, the US want ISIL in power in Ramadi, and they want ISIL in power in Mosul. They probably don't want ISIL in power in Baghdad. They probably don't want ISIL in power in Damascus, but they want them in power everywhere in between. They want what they call a buffer state between the Islamic Republic of Iran and between Damascus and Lebanon and Palestine. The fact that that buffer state will be, in their own words, an Al-Qaeda state, an ISIL state, a sectarian state, a heart-eating, head-chopping, Christian church burning, crucifying, murdering, torturing bunch of madmen, the likes of which have never been seen since Genghis Khan stormed Baghdad a millennium ago, is of absolutely no concern of theirs. Unless, of course, they have guarantees that their interests will not be disturbed. And their primary interest, of course, in the region is the state that they call Israel. And this leads me to the point I alone am making in Britain now, but I suspect I will not be alone in making it for long. If there really was a hostile, fanatic Takfiri front closing in on Damascus, closing in on Baghdad, don't you think Israel would have something to say about it? Don't you think Israel would be moved to do something about it? Don't you think Netanyahu would be at the United Nations now showing us diagrams of how these heart-eating, head-chopping, crucifying madmen were about to take power in the country next door to the stolen land that he governs? Don't you think they'd be pressing the alarm buttons? Don't you think they'd be demanding that the world act before Ayman al-Zawahiri, the new leader of Al-Qaeda, or the so-called self-appointed Caliph Baghdadi, was in power in the country next door to them? You see, for me, this is an unanswerable point. And it's the unanswerable point that is the last straw that breaks the camel's back of the credibility of the so-called Western Allies' fight against ISIL. There's a gang-up against Syria and against Iraq. They are being engulfed, drowned in tens, scores, maybe hundreds of thousands of foreign fighters, armed and financed by the United States satrapies in the Arab countries on the Persian Gulf. They are supported by the neighboring country of Jordan, whatever its protestations to the contrary. And these fanatics can drown Iraq and Syria in blood as far as the United States is concerned, because the only thing that matters to them is to defend Israel, to defend what they call Saudi Arabia, and to keep Iran in a box. That's my view. What's yours?